So there were quite a number of recommendations came out of the project, far more than I'm identifying here. But some of these have already been implemented. So we had a long discussion, and some of the recommendations were talking about trying to ensure that the external profile of the project was maximised, so that we could be sure that there was somebody or there was a group of people involved in the work package and involved in the project who were regularly talking to European decision makers, who were regularly attending policy-making decisions and so on. And I believe that that has now been put into place with a champion being put in place for the project. People are nodding, so I think that's probably true. Yeah. There was certainly a decision that there should be a strategy for influencing policy at both the EU and national levels. And I believe that this has now become a key strand of the work package. So this will be, in addition to what we heard about earlier on this morning, this will be further developed over the course of the remaining part of the project. It was recommended by the baseline study, though, that there should be an EU-led policy, as individual governments are hard to persuade to change. Now, we heard about some EU policy this morning, but there was definitely a feeling that harder policy or more focused policy at the EU level could lead to a greater magnitude of change at the national level. But certainly there was a recognition that we need political support at all levels in order to make sure that these things actually happen. There was some feeling that it may well be possible and desirable to develop a single strategy for the region covered by the project, or perhaps by individual regions within the project itself. And again, I think that the opening presentation about the project was giving some examples of how this is already beginning to happen, certainly within Sweden. But it's likely that that implementation will vary depending on building type. We heard again in Bremen about how existing building standards existing across the region, the building standards that we already have in place, have different impacts on CO2 emission and energy use depending on which country you're actually in. It was one of the few meetings I've ever attended where Britain actually came out top in any category in relation to energy and CO2. In relation to, I think it was office buildings, that current standards within the UK appear to be better than some of the other countries. But certainly there was great variation, but there was some work to be done, I would suggest, in all of the countries that we actually heard about. And certainly a transnational challenge for the region is how to deal with existing buildings as opposed to new builds. So just to conclude, Build with Care then can certainly, as a project, can certainly help to further raise awareness within the community, by which I'm meaning kind of designers, industry, and also the academic community. One of the key aims of Build with Care is to mobilize forces in order to make energy efficient building the mainstream. And I think that this word is incredibly important. Mainstreaming these policies and mainstreaming these aspirations so that they become the norm across the whole of the region has got to be our goal. This needs to move beyond one-off demonstration projects towards something which is happening on a far wider scale. But certainly the development of a transnational strategy, which I believe is going to be one of the main outcomes from the Build with Care project, would appear to be one of the most important things that can come out of the project. Again, just to come back to a couple of points that were made, I'm involved in another Interreg project which is looking at sustainable urban transport. And I was mentioning to Jean over coffee just before we started this morning that a lot of the presentations that I hear in the transport conference, they're not quite that they just take out the word building and put in the word transport, but we'll hear very similar presentations at the transport meeting, but all of the presentations will be about transport. So the percentages change, but nobody at the transport meeting ever thinks of talking about buildings. Or nobody thinks about talking about, well, how does this integrate with where people live, or where we are building housing estates, or what kind of equipment people decide to put into their homes once they actually move in. So I would actually forcefully argue this morning that I think what we need, in addition to very focused projects like Build with Care, is actually funding and support for projects that try to look at things in a much more holistic manner. Because, you know, we'll hear from Gokai this morning, Gokai can only build the house. He can't then control what people are going to do once they move into it. You know, so we need to think about things in a much more holistic manner. Okay, so thanks.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay.